Welcome back to the Left Library, the home of simple political theory. Today, we're not just talking about policy failures or economic mismanagement, we're talking about structural death. We're exposing how the neoliberal global order is not just exploitative, but murderous. How preventable death in the global south is not an unfortunate byproduct, but a functional component of global capitalism. And most importantly, we'll show how this systemic violence reveals the true face of the West, not as a beacon of liberal democracy, but as the command centre of a global neo-fascist regime. This isn't rhetorical exaggeration. As we'll see through Marxist theory, from Marx and Lenin to Samir Amin, Kylian Mbappé and Silvio Federici, capitalism in its neoliberal phase is not merely indifferent to life, but hostile to it. It is a system where surplus populations are no longer even needed as reserve labour. They are to be abandoned, policed, or killed. Let's begin with a foundation in historical materialism. Capitalism does not evolve because of ideas. It evolves in response to contradictions. By the 1970s, capitalism faced a global crisis. Falling rates of profit, militant labour, decolonization movements, and demands for greater redistribution of wealth. Neoliberalism was the capitalist class's response to this crisis. As David Harvey argues, it was not a neutral economic policy. It was a class offensive, a strategy for restoring the power of capital through 5 main mechanisms. 1. The privatization of public assets, which means destroying the commons and creating new markets where there weren't any before. 2. The deregulation of labour and finance. 3. Austerity and the dismantling of welfare states. 4. The globalization of production and value chains. And 5. The financialization of life and debt imperialism. Now, these were not abstract decisions. They were forced on the global south through International Monetary Fund structural adjustment programs and on the global north through union-busting monetarist policy and rising authoritarianism. As Marx wrote in Das Kapital, open quote, "The development of capitalist production makes it necessary constantly to expand the capital laid out in a given industrial undertaking. When profitability stalls, capitalism must seek new forms of accumulation through dispossession, repression, and death." Harvey terms this process accumulation by dispossession. It's the modern form of what Marx called primitive accumulation, which is the violent creation of capitalist social relations through theft, enclosure, and force. So let's look at what this means today. African countries lose $88.6 billion annually in illegal financial flows out of their country, while the West profits from underpriced extraction. Also, over 9 million people die annually around the world from hunger, despite a global food surplus. Also, the global south pays over $200 billion a year in debt servicing, often just to maintain access to foreign exchange markets. Here, Rosa Luxemburg's analysis in The Accumulation of Capital becomes crucial. She argued that capitalism cannot survive on its own terms. It must continuously expand into non-capitalist areas in order to exploit them. That means war, colonialism, and dispossession are not temporary measures. They are permanent features of capitalist reproduction. Now we need to move from economics to biopolitics. Foucault introduced the idea that modern states manage populations through the control of life, health, birth, death. But Marxist thinkers like Silvio Federici and Kylian Mbappé pushed this idea further. Federici shows how the reproduction of labour, especially women's unpaid domestic labour, has always been hidden beneath the wage. When neoliberalism cuts public services, that burden returns to the household, causing what she calls a reproductive crisis. Women in the global south carry the heaviest cost, often dying from childbirth, starvation, or disease, while corporations, usually based in the West, privatise water, healthcare, and the land in their country. Mbappe builds on this idea with necropolitics, the power to let live or make die. He writes, open quote, "The ultimate expression of sovereignty resides in the power and the capacity to dictate who may live and who must die," end quote. Under neoliberalism, death is racialized, classed, and globalized. The global north governs through biopower for its own citizens and necropower for the rest. Life is preserved in the core. Death is outsourced to the periphery. Let's not pretend the imperial core is neutral. It orchestrates this death economy. While preaching democracy and human rights, the US, EU, and UK maintain military bases in over 80 countries, control of global finance via the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and SwiftPay, and monopolies over vaccines, technology, and patents. This is not soft power, this is imperial command. In the 1980s, the US-backed death squads in Latin America crushed land reform programs throughout the continent. In the 1990s, it imposed embargoes on Iraq that killed over 500,000 children, according to UNICEF. In 2023, 54 African nations paid more in debt than they received in aid, while the EU continues to fortify its borders to let migrants drown in the Mediterranean. The liberal West pretends to govern by consent, but it functions by coercion. As Lenin wrote in The State and Revolution, open quote, "The state is a product and a manifestation of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms," end quote. Today, those antagonisms are global, and the state in the imperial core doesn't merely govern for its own bourgeoisies, it governs for global capital. Now we arrive at the central question. How does this system become fascist? Let's be precise. Fascism for Marxists is not just a far-right ideology. It is the open dictatorship of capital when consent from the public breaks down. Clara Zetkin described fascism in 1923 as a, open quote, "mass movement of despair," end quote, weaponized by capital to destroy the working class. Today's fascism doesn't wear jackboots, it wears suits and claims to defend democracy. But functionally, the elements of fascism are all here. For example, militarized policing and surveillance, mass criminalization of migrants and racial minorities, executive overreach and the erosion of civil liberties, state protection of capital at all costs, and corporate state fusion and tech authoritarianism. When Trump sent federal agents to attack protesters, when Macron bypassed parliament, when Israel carpet bombed civilians with US support, this is liberalism decaying into fascism. And crucially, fascism today is transnational. It doesn't need one strongman. It needs a global system where law is replaced by logistics, where human rights are managed by algorithms, and where death is a spreadsheet entry. Now, we must drive this point home, that preventable death is not a bug of capitalism. It is a feature. Structural adjustment causes mass death through malnutrition, untreated disease, and broken life support infrastructure. Trade agreements like NAFTA and the EU's EPAs crush local industry and flood markets with subsidized Western goods. And climate apartheid means that those least responsible for the release of emissions, like Pakistan and Mozambique, suffer the most when the climate changes. This is not accidental. As Engels wrote in The Condition of the Working Class in England, open quote, "When society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet too early and unnatural a death, it commits a crime quite as much as the individual who commits murder," end quote. That was true of slums in 1845, but it is truer today. When global capitalism kills millions by design, yet insists no one is to blame. So what do we call this? A system that maintains global class rule through violence, that protects capital by enforcing death, that criminalizes resistance and builds border walls to keep life out, that allows 40,000 people a day to die from poverty by producing more than enough for all and wasting more than ever before. This is not democracy, and this is not liberalism. This, what we have today, is neo-fascist imperialism. Walter Benjamin warned, open quote, "Every rise of fascism bears witness to a failed revolution," end quote. We must learn from that. The answer is not despair, it is clarity. Capitalism is incompatible with life. Marxism gives us the tools not only to understand the system, but to transform it. The West is not post-fascist. It is fascist in function. It governs through death, backed by markets, militaries, and the media. But from Chile to Kenya, from Palestine to Detroit, people are always fighting back. And they are not asking for inclusion into the death machine. They are demanding something else. Life beyond capital. At the Left Library, we stand with them. If this episode made you think, please subscribe and share. And drop a comment. Where do you see the mask of liberal democracy slipping into fascism today? Until next time, study hard and fight harder.